We are pleased to have Colin Flaherty with us today. He is a journalist, author of Don't Make the Black Kids Angry and White Girl Bleed a Lot, the return of racial violence to America and how the media ignore it. His videos and podcast episodes have been seen by untold millions of people, despite constant attempts by various platforms to censor his work. Now, Colin, your work focuses on Black crime, which of course is forbidden to speak of. We're taught to ignore it or pretend it doesn't exist, rationalize it, excuse it, yet you simply document what the mainstream media refuse to, and that is that Black crime is an epidemic, which may come as a surprise to people who are fed a steady diet of mainstream media. So can you give us an idea about how big this problem is?
So I show two problems, right? The Black crime, violence, mayhem, anarchy, chaos, wildly out of proportion. Then I also document how reporters and public officials are in denial, deceit, and delusion about it. So it's really two things, right? And, so I just got a letter today. I got a really heavy book. And I got this book of the most beautiful paintings of the Civil War I've ever seen. I'm not going to dox the guy. Maybe he'll let me dox him later on. But the guy who did the paintings in the book, hundreds of them, in this major book, he's the guy who sent me a letter telling me his personal experience with Black crime and violence all during his life, whether it happened to him in grade school, high school, in the service, or a couple weeks ago. The numbers, if you don't know the numbers now, if you don't understand the numbers, the crime rate, Black crime rate, when you compare it to the white crime rate, it's only because you don't want to understand it. You don't want to know it. Black crime rate versus white crime rate is 3 times, 10 times, 1,000 times greater. I mean, we could see it in the newspapers every day. Ask a cop, ask a white person or an Asian person who has lived near Black people. Read my books. They're all over that too.
And with what's happened this year, it's gotten a whole lot worse. This racial divide and the way the media ignore it and condone it. What have you thought about the past year and what you've seen in these developments?
Well, there's been a lot of political stuff in the last 6 months, right? We have George Floyd. So I don't even really count them that much. So I'm just focusing on the main, just kind of ordinary Black crime. For example, I'm working on a podcast right now. It'll be out tomorrow. Just like over the weekend, 3 mass shootings in Philadelphia. 3. These are black things, home invasions, all on, high def. So it's weird that, just a couple months ago, the FBI director went to Congress. The head of the FBI went to Congress and told them the #1 domestic terror threat in the United States of America right now is white nationalism and white supremacy. This is like he was right on the cusp of over 1,000 riots since the death of George Floyd in Minneapolis, 1,000 riots by Black people and by people yelling Black Lives Matter as they throw rocks and bricks and bottles at police and burn down stores. So it's just astonishing how much of this happens. It's astonishing how many people are in denial, deceit, delusion about it. I mean, that's for the FBI director to come to us and tell us that somehow somebody with a pickup truck and a Confederate flag is like the worst person in the world because all they do is roam the country and beat the piss out of Black people. That's delusional. That's how bad it is.
And if we had so many examples of this happening by white supremacists, this supposed, boogaloo boys and this white supremacists everywhere. I mean, if the media really had that, then they would cover that story every day. There would be another story like that every day. But we don't see that. What we see is constant stories of Black victimization. In fact, the subtitle of your book, Don't Make the Black Kids Angry, is, quote, the hoax of Black victimization and those who enable it. I did a video back in early June, I believe it was, about how the relationship between the media and these leftist, guilty, good whites is exactly like that of an addict and their enabler. And just like in that relationship, there are consequences not only for the addict and the enabler, but for everyone around them. And by the media doing this to us, ignoring this and gaslighting us into believing that this is really the problem of that whites have to fix, and it's white supremacist. I mean, they're putting all of us at potential risk by doing this.
You know, it's weird because I've often thought the same thing you just said, which is whenever we talk about this level of black crime, violence, and denial, deceit, delusion from reporters and public officials, it's really hard not to slip into the language of addiction and codependence. I mean, it's the metaphor is perfect. So much stuff's going. Did you happen to see any of the hearings last week with Judge Amy Coney Barrett?
Yeah, I was just looking at those. Yeah.
There was a tiny little segment on there. A lot of people missed it, I think, where she started talking about George Floyd. Did you happen to hear that?
Yes, I did. It was just heartbreaking.
Yeah. So she's talking, and she's telling Senator Durbin of Illinois, she's telling him how she and her black daughter from Haiti, adopted daughter from Haiti, they cried together over the death of George Floyd because she had to explain to her daughter that when her daughter got out into the world, well, there was a pretty damn good chance that something like that was going to happen to her, because that's all white cops do, is they go around and picking on black people for no reason whatsoever. Now, what really should have happened, and what really has to happen in her family, this is not a legal discussion anymore. This is a discussion of personal survival. She's moving to Washington, D.C. from South Bend. She's moving from one chocolate city to another. Except Washington's way worse. So in Washington, who's going to be the one to give her kids the talk about all the metros they can't ride, the parts of town they can't go in? Who's going to tell them about this black crime and violence in Washington, D.C. and how they target white people? Who's going to tell her kids about that? Are there going to be any tears for all the white victims of this crime in Washington, D.C.? Haven't seen any tears from hers yet. But when I think of Washington, D.C., I think of if I'm going on too long, stop me. I think of two stories that really, to me, kind of like symbolize what's going on in Washington. Do you remember it was a year or so ago, maybe a little longer, some high school kids from the Midwest ended up in Washington, D.C., and they're looking at a list of colleges, and somebody says, hey, you want to go to Howard? They go, we never heard of Howard. Let's go to Howard. Let's see what that is. They didn't know it was like America's oldest and most notorious black college. So they go to Howard. The minute they get off the bus, the minute they step on the campus, they are threatened, assaulted, scorned, robbed. They go into the cafeteria to get some lunch. They're literally run out of the cafeteria. The next day, the school newspaper runs a big editorial going how proud they are of the Howard students from protecting their campus, their school, from these marauders who came onto campus for some nefarious reason. Like, yeah, we're just some high school kids. We want to see what's going on. The day after that, the president of the university sent out a tweet saying the same thing. So who's going to tell Judge Amy Coney Island Barrett that her kids are going to be targets of black hostility anytime by the way, that applies to all the neighbors around Howard. They don't want anything to do with white people walking across their campus. Big story in the Washington Post. I could tell Washington, D.C. stories from now until doomsday. But my question is Judge Amy Coney Island Barrett going to tell her kids the truth, the same way she told them that fairy tale about that drug addicted, hardened convict passing counterfeit money, George Floyd?
Anybody who is labeled a racist or a white supremacist by organizations like the ADL and the SPLC is automatically somebody whose work I look into. I was digging into what got you labeled a racist by the FPLC, and I think it was this story that you did back in 2014. It was about a guy named David Runzel, a writer for the SPLC, who you say white privilege was what got David Runzel killed. Can you tell
Well,
us
here's
more
the
about
thing.
that story?
Yeah, so David Runzel used to write for the Southern Poverty Law Center, the biggest poverty race hustling pimps in America. So, but he's the one who did the early work, the early writing on this thing called white privilege. Now, he was all about all about how black people are relentless victims of relentless white racism all the time, everywhere. That explains everything. He was down with the cause. He moves out to Oakland. He kind of gives up his social justice warrior thing, at least on the surface, becomes a teacher. He does the picket fence, the house. He decides one day in Oakland, dangerous town, that he is going to go to one of these urban parks, take a little jog through nature, walk through nature, met a couple of fellas, and they killed him. And they killed him because for some reason, David Runzel's white privilege, this is how they explain it to me, his white privilege gave him a sense of entitlement of safety in that park that he should not have had, because black people don't have that entitlement of safety. So when I wrote that story, reminding people that this dude who justified black violence for so long now is a victim of the same thing that he justified, good Lord, those people got pissed off at me. Basically, the drill now is that every white person's a racist. And everybody is. So if you're not carrying a Confederate flag around, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if you're one of their allies. You're all guilty of the same thing. Guilty of subconscious racism, unconscious racism. It doesn't really matter. Everybody's guilty. That's what's weird. So everybody here thought they were doing the right thing, right? We're all out here obeying the law, cutting our lawns, sending our kids to school, paying taxes, going to church. We think that's all good. Well, now we are told that everything we thought was good is actually bad. And all the people who claim to be the victims of this white racism, now they're actually good just because they're a criminal sitting in jail. Everything's upside down.
Yeah, it is. And every time we are told that we need to have a dialogue about this race issue, what we are subjected to is a diatribe, a monologue on how bad Whitey is and how we need to change. And the responsibility is 100% on us to change. It's always about that dialogue, but it never seems to happen, right?
There is no dialogue. There is no discussion. The famous in schools, they teach teachers, they're probably the biggest course they teach teachers. It's called Courageous Conversations, written by a guy named Dr. Glenn Singleton. So it's called Courageous Conversations because, the way they started off is they look you in the eye, you, the white teacher, and they say, okay, here's what's about to happen. We expect you to be courageous enough to admit your racism is what is responsible for this enormous level of black chaos, dysfunction, and bad business in the schools. From discipline to grades, everything is way below where it should be. So you have to admit your racism. And if you're one of these people, kind of mildly put your hand up and goes, hey, I've been here for 20 years. I'm a football coach. My students always come back, black and white, tell me what a great guy I was. If you're one of those people, I've got tons of letters. I put them in my book, White Girl Bleed a Lot, and Don't Make the Black Kids Angry. Tons of letters from people who said, that's what I did. I got fired after that. That happens in the corporate world too. If you put your hand up and you say, hey, I don't know, man, I'm pretty good. I don't feel like I'm a bad person. I do the right thing. You get a little black mark next to your name. You don't want that black mark there.
Yeah, we've seen some positive movement in regards to that with Trump stopping this critical race theory that goes on in federal agencies, and these anti-bias trainings, which is really just another way of saying anti-white. These trainings all rely on critical race theory. And I think there was a good thing that Trump did to stop that. Yet, you see, the other day I saw this at the University of Minnesota, this woman.
Yeah, I saw that.
She had,
yeah.
you see that? A class based on the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous, recovery from white supremacy. You know, you see the president of Oregon releasing a statement this past week on the university's commitment to defy Trump's executive order. I mean, it seems like the agenda always presses forward, and any opposition to it is short-lived and mostly ineffectual. But what's important here is that we really keep hammering this into people's heads, right? I mean, telling the truth about what is really going on.
You know, I love people talking about critical race theory because I've been talking about it for about 7 or 8 years, but I hardly ever call it that. I only call it that once a month just to remind people, like, listen, I don't want to bore anybody, but this is called critical race theory. But I don't hear people defining it enough. Critical race theory is this. Critical race theory says Black people are relentless victims of relentless white racism all the time, everywhere. That explains everything, and it's permanent. That's critical race theory. Remember when I first started talking about it, people would go, hey, Colin, I know you're being dramatic and you're exaggerating things because nobody would ever believe that crazy idea. And I'm saying, no, I know it sounds crazy, but this is being taught in schools right now. We're not only teaching it to teachers, we're not only giving them, but it's in the textbooks, it's in the lectures, it's at the military academies, it's at the EPA, Department of Justice, Department of Education, top to bottom, all over the country. This thing has got tentacles every nook and cranny. And I know Trump signed an executive order, but I think it's actually going to take a little bit more to pull this thing out by the roots. It deserves to be pulled. But here's the thing with these big companies. So if I do business with the federal government, I'm not allowed to, subject them to this critical race theory bias training. By the way, bias training is only for white people, right?
Right.
They don't send Black people to bias training. But it's weird because I haven't heard anybody talk about this yet, but a lot of small companies do business with the federal government and the city government. Well, guess what? City government, these city governments, the state governments, they're still on board with this 1,000%. So they're doing the bias training. So the critical race theory. So I don't know how that's going to work out.
Yeah, I did a video a while back on the guy who coined the term microaggression. His name was Dr. Chester Pierce, and he was straight out of the Saul Alinsky Rules for Radicals playbook, kind of the, communist, critical theory, Marxist kind of guy. And, those people have been all over the institutions for more than a half century now.
Well, hope he's proud of himself.
Yeah, me too. Colin, when people say, these FBI crime statistics, these, 13% of the population doing 52% of the violent crime, 60% of Black women being raped by Black men before they turn 18 years old. Not only is this,
and 90% of them not getting reported.
Yeah, and that's due to the fact that they are told from an early age that you don't want to put another Black man in prison, but you want to protect the race at all costs.
Where's that from? Okay, I'm going to test you now. I'm really going to test you. Where's that quote from?
I don't know. I mean, I've heard it on your podcast.
That's from the Huffington Post. So the reason I mention it is because it's not like this is something you and I just heard on the street corner. No, this is the Huffington Post explaining why Black people don't turn in Black men for rape. The New York Times did an almost identical story. They didn't have that quote. Pretty much the same thing. It's like rape is rampant, but nobody wants to turn them in. Yeah,
and this is the same thing that happens with Bronx juries and with witness intimidation and the snitches get stitches culture. And, the problem is it's not going to be solved by Whitey, yet it is all on us to fix their problems for them.
Yeah, I've heard this so often, right? It's always preceded by this. It's like, what, white people? Trying to educate you is exhausting. So this is on you now. You got the work to do. You've got to be anti-racist. You've got to do your work, just like that 12-step program tells you. You have to, whatever you're doing, you kind of have to drop it and devote the rest of your life to working all this white racism out the inside of you. I don't know what you were doing for a living before, but you pretty much have to stop. And, it's weird. So again, like you and I are just sitting here. Sometimes we see our friends in the backyard. We think we're the good guys. All of a sudden we're the bad guys. And in our lives, I mean, people I know, they're pretty strict about taking responsibility for their own lives. I'm not perfect. I'll take responsibility for that. But you know what? I'm not taking any responsibility for anybody else's BS. I'll take my own, not yours. So I don't know why people just go on MSNBC and NPR all day long and try to blame us for stuff that we had nothing to do with. It's like, hey, man, fix yourself. Don't bug me about it.
Well, that's right. And if this enablement continues by the media and leftists, it's only going to get worse. I mean, the entitlement. There was this woman, Ashley Shackelford. It's turned into a meme now where she's sitting in front of a bunch of white people saying basically all whites are racist. And here's my PayPal address.
Yeah. That's a joke. It's almost like a joke, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. It is. But so many people think this is reality. Even when you point out these statistics, they will say something like, that is more evidence that we live in a white supremacist society, that all of these black people are going to jail and that all of these rapes are happening. And these numbers are probably inflated anyway. But there's a problem with that because we have the Bureau of Justice statistics. We have the victimization surveys, where it's not just the fact that there are crime statistics out there, but there are victims who corroborate these numbers.
You were talking about that woman. What'd you say her name was?
Ashley Shackelford, I think.
Here's the thing: you were being too kind to her. To set the stage for the picture you're talking about. Picture a very pleasantly plump black woman, very large black woman. She's wearing very tight clothing, and she's got this whiteboard where she's got all this anti-white stuff up there. So this woman dresses like she's going to a nightclub, but in clothes that are about 10 sizes too small. And she's trying to tell us she's actually a lecturer, an academic lecturer in white racism. And not only do you have to pay attention, you have to give her some money. That's how ridiculous this whole thing is now. And I think a lot of people, they think they kind of had the luxury of kind of not paying attention to this and just letting this go by them while they carry on with their lives. But it's getting so intrusive and so in your face that a lot of people are figuring it out that there's something really wrong going on in this country and they're going to do something about it.
Well, yeah, and a lot of people figure it out in a terribly tragic way. Yeah. And I wanted you to give us a little bit more about what Harvard criminologist like Robert Sampson means when he says routine activities theory. What is that?
So in Chicago, this came out of a trial in Chicago that the Chicago newspapers were desperate not to cover, but they couldn't figure out how not to cover it. So a white girl from California is kind of going a little crazy at the airport, 20-year-old white girl, take her to jail where she's so crazy, they don't even want her in the jail cell. They kick this white girl out in a halter top and a short shorts, no money, no phone. They kick her out of jail into the worst ghetto in Chicago. This is the biggest black neighborhood in Chicago. A couple hours later, she's being tossed out of a 7th-story window. Permanent, she was raped, tossed out the window, permanent mental, physical damages. Her parents sue. During the trial, this Harvard sociologist you just mentioned, I'm very impressed you know his name because I forget his name. I talk about this all the time. He said he talked about something called routine activity theory, which said if a white person walks in a black neighborhood, he can routinely expect to be the victim of black violence. And he was testifying to the incompetence, to the lack of responsibility of the police for releasing this woman into the neighborhood where they should have known what was going to happen to her. And so the judge made a ruling, and this was the largest personal injury case against the city of Chicago, $22.4 million. And in the judge's ruling against the city, He said, you could have taken that woman down to the Chicago Zoo and put her in a lion cage with a bunch of lions, and that would have been safer than what you did to her, because we know from routine activity theory, white people are not safe in black neighborhoods. By the way, there's no corollary. There's nothing that says black people aren't safe in white neighborhoods. It's all just white aren't safe in black neighborhoods. Black and white, Chicago papers, huge thing. Thank God that Harvard sociologist did something right for once. But it's weird, isn't it? R-A-T, rat.
Yeah, it really is. And the fact that even in the most wealthy black communities, the crime rate is higher than that of some of the poorest white communities.
That's a fact, senor. Plain
Yeah.
fact.
Colin, I overheard you. I heard your podcast this summer. One of the interviews you did with somebody, and the guy was like, how are we going to strategize this, Colin? How we need a new strategy to get this message out there, to get this information out there, and you kind of, you just didn't know what to say.
I'm sure I was very kind and polite to him.
Yeah, yeah, it got a little heated for a very good reason. I mean, what other message? How can we convey this message in any other way? And all we're doing here is simply stating that this reality exists. This isn't the reality that the media tell you about. It's not pretty. It's not easy to hear these numbers. And of course, we would rather not have it be that way, but it is. And, you've talked about this being the greatest hoax of our generation. I don't even know how much more clear we can be if you're documenting this stuff every day and it happens every day. I was just checking Chicago's count this weekend, and this 7 killed, 40 shot, and this happens every weekend.
That sounds like a slow weekend for Chicago.
It may be crazy to say, Colin, but I think what unites the mainstream media in a lot of ways is their disdain for white people.
Stephen Saylor, I think, was the first one to say that about 10 years ago. He was talking about the Democratic Party. And usually when you have all these different interest groups, at some point, it's a zero-sum game. So at some point, whatever I get only because I take from you, somebody in our coalition. So that normally these things, they fall apart. So Saylor was the one who figured out that the one thing keeping this coalition together is everybody a member of it is anti-white. And so, there's no doubt that that's true. There's so much of it. It's so casual, isn't it? It's just casual. It's like, whatever. Then somebody goes and posts a sign on their college campus that said, being white. What was the old one? Being white is okay, or something. It's okay to be white.
It's okay to be white. Yeah.
They had FBI agents call on that person's home. I mean, what about the guy? What about that? The Bubba Wallace, the NASCAR driver. It was, what was it? 6 months ago, 4 months ago? He had a noose in his garage. The next day, we have 15 FBI agents flooding the zone to get rid of these bastards who are tying nooses in all the NASCAR garages. Of course, there was no noose. Meanwhile, 1 mile from here, where the famous Hunter Biden computer shop is, they can't get one agent over there to look to see if that stuff is real. It's bizarre.
Yeah, good point. And the way that the Nigerian white supremacist attacked Jussie Smollett last year. I mean, that was one of the most brazen attempts by the media to just gaslight us into believing something that was completely implausible.
Yeah. So here's the thing. These things kind of happened at the same time, didn't they? Remember the famous woman in Central Park? The one who had the dog?
Yeah.
And the bird watcher. So now she's on trial for making a false call to the cops about this black person who actually threatened her. By the way, that was a threat. When he said, if you don't do this, you're not going to like what happens. That's a threat. Anyway, So she's in trouble. Her life's over. She lost her job, her friends. She's got to start over somewhere. Her life is done as soon as she gets out of this legal thing because of that one phone call. At the same time, there's Jussie Smollett doing his hoax thing too, right? I just saw in the paper like 2 days ago, Jussie Smollett is going to be a director of a major feature film in Hollywood. There.
Yeah, can see it.
Okay.
Okay,
Sorry
so
about that.
you were talking about Jussie
Jussie.
Smollett being off.
Yeah, so say Jussie that said the same thing. And now, yesterday, I saw in the paper just like 2 days ago, he's going to be the director of a major feature film in Hollywood. So it's one girl, a little white girl, making a phone call. Her life's over. Jussie Smollett does 1,000 times worse, creates this enormous racial hoax in Chicago, and he's being kicked upstairs by leaps and bounds. You know, one thing I did like about the Jussie Smollett hoax, which I like about all hoaxes, is that they really show us how eager the press is to report these fairy tales of white racism and black victimization without one molecule of evidence. They're so eager to do that. Hundreds and hundreds of hoaxes.
There is a website for that. Is it hatecrimehoaxes.com? Fakehatecrimes.com. And you see it all the time with this stuff. You know, that's a really common occurrence. And with the Jussie Smollett thing, and it's not only excused and justified and rationalized, it's rewarded. And when you incentivize this behavior, you're going to get more of it.
The dude's like the fact that he's in the middle of this absolutely makes him a hero on the streets of Chicago. And absolutely, people still think white guys wearing Trump hats put a noose around his neck and tried to kill him. That's insane. That's what that is.
Yeah, it is. You know, Colin, a subtext to your work is that you do this without racism, without rancor, without apologies, which is important to remember here because, you know, it's easy to discount work like you do. It's easy for those in the media to discount you and your work as racist and dismiss it as racist, saying that your motivations must be from hatred. And with your work and with my work and things that we do in pointing this out, I mean, this is not about hatred at all. This is about loving the lives that we have and the good things that we have in life and defending the truth, which is the best way that you honor the good things in your life and the love that you have for people. You know, if you're not going to be honest with people, you don't love them.
I don't worry about what the fools say about me. I let them worry about what I say about them. I couldn't care less what people call me a name. Couldn't care less. The only thing I care about, the only thing no one's ever been able to say is point to something I wrote or said and say, Colin, you said 200 black people were rampaging through the campus of Temple University in North Philadelphia, putting 6 white kids in the hospital. Colin, you got that wrong because that was 200 Amish kids that were doing that. So that never happens. That's the only thing I care about, whether my stuff is true or false, not whether some fool who I'm exposing likes being exposed or not. Couldn't care less. We're all white racists. And that is how we look in the eyes of eyes of the people who are ruining this country. So let's not, I don't let that stop me. I don't even pause to think about it. So let's just keep going and not even worry about those fools. Again, we have to make them worry about us, not the other way around. That word doesn't bother me. It just rolls off of me. And, I've got a lot of good reviews on my books, done a lot of work in my career as a journalist. I got a black dude out of prison once. That was a big deal. Showed he was false.
Was his name, right?
Kelvin Wiley got out of prison. He was falsely accused of trying to kill his girlfriend, white girlfriend. I showed the crime never took place, got him out. That was a big deal. I was a hero to the NPR and the LA Times back then. Not anymore.
Yeah, I don't imagine NPR has called you recently for an interview.
I've been mentioned, I get mentioned on there from time to time on Code Switch. They mention my books. Uh, but nobody's really, I've noticed, I was talking to Jared Taylor about this the other day. I've noticed the fellas are a lot less willing to kind of confront us because I think they figured out, at least about me, is that there aren't any little chinks they can get into. I don't do causes. I don't do solutions. I just do something right in the middle about this enormous level of black crime and denial, deceit, delusion. So my attitude is, hey, this is happening. And we use videos, we use police report, 911 calls. So it's like, there's so much material, it's hard to deny that something's happening.
Yeah, and this is what is going to eventually bust up the narrative, is that people have cameras all the time and they're filming this stuff, and this stuff ends up on YouTube and World Star Hip Hop and you know all these sites on the internet where they're documenting these things that happen that destroy the narrative. I mean, how much longer do you think the mainstream media can keep this up?
Tucker Carlson said the other night, he said, after this election, all these big media liars are going to disappear. He said they just have to. They're too dishonest. They've been too dishonest for too long. So I don't know, but I don't know the answer to that. But I do know that a lot of people are seeing the difference between what the reporters say is happening and what I say is happening over here. And I'm the one with the 911 calls and the videos. And I'm the one connecting dots, making patterns. And a lot of people, they kind of understand that a lot. They're really kind of yearning for the truth. They're yearning just for somebody to say something. And when they hear me talk about this very plainly, without apologies, their overwhelming reaction is kind of relief. Like, man, glad somebody was out there saying that without dancing around it.
Yeah, and these terms that they use have been so muddied because they just hurl them at everyone. And this summer did a lot of favors in waking people up to the reality of the situation.
I think so, didn't it?
Yeah, it really.
Let me
I
ask you
think
this:
a lot of people
just your friends, just your friends. Did you notice any people in their backyards going, "Hey, man, I didn't sign up for this"? Are you noticing any people in your life that are just kind of astonished at what's happening right now that didn't know before?
Yeah, and I think that they're beginning to doubt the veracity of anything that the mainstream media puts out as a result, which is a great thing.
Yeah, and the media has just been misreporting this race story for such a long time, and now we see that got so many things. just the Russia Gate, the Hunter Biden stuff. They're just really determined just to keep testing the limits of how much they can not tell us the truth and stay in business. I don't know what the answer to that question is. Hey, you were talking about all the video cameras out there.
Yeah.
I'm still waiting for the videos of my favorite hate crime of the century. That was what, 2-3 summers ago, when somebody went into LeBron James's home and they spray painted white racist slogans on his garage.
Yeah.
If you see a picture of that neighborhood, like every way in and out of that neighborhood is nothing but high def cameras, right? And then you take a picture of going down LeBron's driveway, and all you see there are like a bunch of cameras up there. So somebody knows who painted those pictures. And I, for one, those racist slogans, I'm not going to rest until we find out.
Yeah. I don't know if you saw this, but I did a video making fun of it. It was Mariah Carey. She said she's promoting a new book, by the way, and she comes up with this story that her 9-year-old son was bullied by a 9-year-old white supremacist at a school that costs $90,000 a year in Beverly Hills. So apparently now we got to be worried about 9-year-old white supremacist bullies in Beverly Hills.
People are just so eager to be a victim of this. I don't quite understand the appeal of that. Maybe I'll try it someday just to find out the answer to that.
Yeah, victimhood is it's become a currency nowadays. Colin, do you have any books or projects that you're working on right now that you could tell us about?
Man, I got so many things going on right now. So I've got White Girl Bleed a Lot, Don't Make the Black Kids Angry. I've got the audio of White Girl Bleed a Lot, working on the audio of Don't Make the Black Kids Angry. I got a book on hoaxes I'm working on. I got a book on the title of the other book I'm working on is called It's Not Our Fault, You Can't Fight. It's a story of people's personal experience with Black crime and violence. You know, a lot of celebrities have had that experience. You may have seen this when I put it out on my YouTube channel. Did you ever see that video from Henry Rollins? I guess he has a gig as like a moderator for National Geographic Stories. So they were taking these famous people back to their grade school. They took him back to the school in Southeast Washington, D.C., where Henry Rollins, the adult Henry Rollins, walked into the grade school and he said, these kids Black kids used to surround me and harass me and taunt me, threaten me and beat me until I pissed my pants. White, something fight. You know, white can't fight. This was every day. And he's telling us this. But then you flash forward, and if anybody in America is down with the cause of white racism and Black victimization, is Henry Rollins. You know, when he was like in his 20s, he's walking back to his place in Venice Beach outside of LA. His best friend is with him. A couple of Black people come up and kill his best friend in a robbery. But if you read Henry Rollins' comments today, he's just down with the cause. He just doesn't understand. The cause is not down with him. A lot of Howard Stern, Henry Rollins. Who was the woman from Top Gun? What was her name? You remember her name? Kelly McGillis.
Oh, who is
Kelly
it?
McGillis.
Yeah.
Kelly McGillis.
Yeah.
Boy, lots of celebrities have had just wicked experiences with horrific levels of Black violence. And a lot of them aren't really that eager to talk about it.
Yeah, you know, you mentioned Howard Stern, and he made an interesting point about why that was, because his mother wanted him to be the Jewish ambassador to the Blacks at this predominantly Black school. And that's a lot of the way that parents want to handle this, is they see their children going into these Black schools and being the ambassador.
You know, sending a white kid to a Black school is an act of child abuse. That's what happened to Howard Stern. He was in that school for 1 year in Long Island, Roosevelt University High School, I believe it was called, where he said every day he was getting attacked to school, from school, in school, every day. And now he looks back on it and he doesn't feel the urgency of it anymore. He kind of is coated over with gauze and turned it into a comedy bit. Meanwhile, he's out there supporting Joe Biden for president. So I guess he's well over that little escapade. Yeah,
it's amazing how they seem to forget, and they it's like they take the reverse of the red pill. It's hilarious. They go back to being blue pilled.
That's weird, isn't it?
Yeah, it really is. So, Colin, I know we can find one of your books on Amazon. I mean, you've been censored everywhere. Tell everybody where we can find your books.
The best place to get my books is at a publishing house called lulu.com, LULU.com. I've been kicked off. Amazon kicks half of my stuff off half the time, so easy to find it there. Some of my stuff is still on Amazon. My podcasts are easy to find everywhere except iTunes. You know, I get kicked off all these places, but everybody that follows me doesn't really care. They just kind of follow along with me, and it's like, okay, hey, here we are. You know, we kind of feel like we're the resistance. We're the ones behind enemy lines. We're the ones meeting in secret. We're the ones having trouble opening up our lines of communication. We're the ones fearing for our jobs, our lives, our families if we get caught exposing this Black bullshit, part of my bad language. So it really is like the resistance. I feel like, we're behind the German lines in France in World War II or something here.
But yeah, and doesn't it seem weird to be to have to do that in a white supremacist society? It's strange how that works out.
Yeah, and You know, if you're doing it for a while, it kind of the normalcy of it just kind of washes over you. But if you step away from it and you come back into it and you go, oh my God, they're really not going to let me talk about this. Some 23-year-old purple-haired chick with a nose ring is going to sit at her desk and Twitter, Facebook, and Google and YouTube and just, push a button that says, no, that's not happening, Colin. That's really, they're going to prevent you and me, and I from talking. That's really, listen, I'm not one of these people that goes around saying, seeing something small and goes, oh my God, that's scary. But guess what? That is scary. And I hope this time they finally overplayed their hand when they kicked off the New York Post. And I hope these guys in Congress finally figure out that the biggest threat to our republic right now are these high-tech guys that are suppressing our some of our really basic human rights.
Absolutely. And I hope they're held to task on that. So, Colin, I really appreciate you taking the time to talk with me today. I noticed on Twitter you mentioned Ilana Mercer's work. She writes about kind of the same stuff, right?
Yeah, so Ilana Mercer is from South Africa. What I like about Ilana Mercer's work, she had wrote a book called Into the Cannibal's Pot. And to me, Ilana, from reading her book, the lessons from South Africa for us here is not that we should get, 1 million troops and go down there and straighten everything out. No, that's the worst thing. But the world has turned its back on South Africa because the world believes that whatever happens to white people in South Africa, they deserve it. And that's what we're seeing happening here. And that's what I really enjoyed about Ilana Mercer's book. We're seeing a lot of white people getting victimized here. And a lot of people are somehow going, well, you deserved it. So really bad.
Yeah, I noticed on Twitter that you had recommended her work, and I looked into it. I appreciate that, and I appreciate all the work that you do, man.
Ditto, big man.
Thank you so much for taking the time today. And I'll put the links to lulu.com and everything on the description to the video.
Oh, good. And I'll tweet this thing out too.
Okay, great. Thanks a lot, man.
All the best to you, big man.